Hey everyone, the infamous JoeG here, and welcome to part 2 in our series on no-code development with CyberArk's REST APIs using Postman. In this particular part, we're going to be focusing on a couple different things. First, we need to get our Postman collection up to date with all of the changes that have taken place since the last video I did, part 1. We'll also cover the differences between a normal user and a service user in the CyberArk Identity provider. This is a main way of authenticating to services that are SaaS-based. So even if you are a self-hosted PAM customer, you may need to interact with this identity authentication endpoint at some point in the future, since some of our newer services are SaaS only. However, at the end of the day, you'll be able to understand what a normal user is compared to a service user, the differences in how they authenticate, and how you can implement authentication workflows and strategies into your web apps and automation, depending on what type of users will be accessing them. So we'll cover all of this today in part 2 of no-code development using Postman with CyberArk. So here we have our CyberArk REST API public versions. I have the original source up here. You guys won't see that, but this is the original one that we forked a version off of. When you fork a version, you're essentially saying, give me a copy, but I want to still be able to refresh from it. Here, I have YouTube videos. I have other ones called Joe Garcia's fork. That's the default name. So you may see yours as your name's fork. However, I'm working in one that I titled YouTube video. And so this fork now is a complete replica of when I decided I wanted to fork the CyberArk REST API public Postman collection. In order to get changes and get it up to date with all of the changes that have happened, we need to do something called pull changes. So we're going to be messing with this particular Postman collection today. We're going to pull changes in from the original Postman collection, and then we should see the changes update here once those changes are successfully pulled. So what we're going to be looking for is up here next to my pretty picture is a bell icon. That bell icon is where all of the notifications when changes to the original Postman collection are made are going to come up in this watching tab here that I just clicked on. So changes will be made, notifications will go there, and then we'll come to our Postman collection with the fork that we made, and we're going to need to pull changes from it. So we're not going to be able to do that directly through the notifications section. We're going to have to come to the actual Postman collection and then click on these 3 dots to view more actions. And the menu that's presented to us has one called Pull Changes with a down arrow. And we're going to click this in order to bring in any changes that were made publicly. And so what this is going to present us is what's called a get diff. It's going to show us the differences between the changes we're going to pull down based on what Postman collection we have currently. You can see there's a lot of added, moved, removed, modified. Everything is changing here. The entire folder structure is changing. We're splitting things between self-hosted and SaaS, and then we're going to be making each request within those folders based on the services that they're tied to. So if you're a security person, you want to review every change that comes in, that's cool, right? There's a lot of changes here you can go through and take a look at, but a majority of people will just want to click pull changes in the upper right-hand corner, that big orange button. But for you security people out there that like to review everything, you'll be able to scroll down to the very bottom and it'll start to get into the actual code changes that are happening on each request. This is, for example, where it was removed at the top and then what was added. So it's showing you the changes, what's being deleted, what's being added. Okay. And so all we really need to do here now after reviewing all of this is click the Pool Changes button. We can see here lines 11 through 13, removing a little bit, adding a bunch of change notes here on the different changes that were made. So you can go through all of the requests will have this depending on what type of badge they had, right? If it's modified, you'll be able to find that there. But let's go ahead and pull in these changes so that we can start to work on getting them implemented. The pool changes process should take approximately 3 to 5 minutes, but I would give it at least up to 10 minutes for it to be able to reach out to the source on the public internet to update our fork here. So I'm going to pull changes. We're going to do a little time travel, and I'll come back once those changes have been pulled. All right, and there we have it. We have a self-hosted folder now. We have a SaaS folder now. We have updated this collection to current. So now any other time that changes are made to the source collection by me, right, and pushed out to the public facing internet, you'll get a notification at the bell, and then you'll know to come pull changes. All right. So we're all set here. Now let's take a look at this new collection because, definitely completely different from what we were working with before. So let's talk about how it's split up. As you know, if you've attended Impact, talked to anyone from CyberArk in the past couple years, we've been introducing an identity security platform that is SaaS-based. And we are now at a point where products are separate between whether they are self-hosted or they are SaaS-based. Some of our products are only SaaS-based. Some of our products can be self-hosted as well as SaaS-based. And so I thought it was about time for us to redo the architecture of the folder structure for the Postman collection. And it's split up between whether your product that you're working with, that you're going to be talking to, is either self-hosted or SaaS. And in some instances, you may have both. You may have a self-hosted PAM solution that you're working with, but it's tied via a connector to a SaaS-based product like Secrets Hub, Dynamic Privileged Access, Secure Cloud Access, any of the other products out there that may be able to support synchronization from a self-hosted vault. So you're going to choose your own adventure, right? To start off with, we have self-hosted, and when we expand that out, we have Privileged Access Manager, Conjur Enterprise, and then the credential providers. So we can still get our self-hosted REST APIs through this way, right? PAM is going to be what we remember with authentication being Windows, CyberArk, LDAP, etc. Nothing has changed there. Or we can go the SaaS route. And that's what this video is going to be about today. We're going to be focusing on how to authenticate with the new CyberArk Identity provider that is the authentication mechanism for all of the other SaaS products: Privilege Cloud, Dynamic Privileged Access, Remote Access, Secrets Hub, Cloud Entitlements Manager, Secure Cloud Access, and Connector Management. Now, you may have noticed I skipped over Conjur Cloud. While it is the initial authentication vector for Conjur Cloud still requires an additional authentication in order to get a token that it can understand, which we'll cover here towards the end of the video. But first, I want to talk about, really the biggest issue that I see people dealing with today, and that is how to authenticate just to do something in Privilege Cloud, right? In order to do that, I have to authenticate through identity to get a session token. And then I can use that session token against Privilege Cloud or any of these other services down here that we have. And the way that you authenticate an identity is definitely different from the way that you authenticate, with the self-hosted PAM solution, because identity itself is an identity provider. So not only does it have its own cloud directory that you can create users in, it can also federate with external identity providers. So you can be federated with your on-premise Active Directory. You can be federated with Azure Active Directory. You can be federated with Okta, with any other cloud directories, identity providers, or anything that's out there. So it's really the central place for all of your identity to be able to be centralized. You can apply roles to them. It is a normal identity provider, just happens to be able to handle SSO and MFA in an adaptive way. So we're going to be focusing on the authentication folder here for this particular video because we're going to talk about how to authenticate to identity. Now, identity, the way that you authenticate with it is a multi-step process. There are two different types of users that you can create in identity. And based on those user types is how you're going to interact with logging in through identity, authenticating with identity. You have normal users, which are assumed to be human users, and they have an authentication profile applied to them that dictates how they can multi-factor authenticate. So normal users have multi-factor authentication. It will be a multiple step authentication process through the API for us to be able to not only authenticate them initially, but respond to the challenge of their multi-factor authentication mechanism. The other type of user is called a service user. In unattended automation scenarios where a human is unable to interact with what the automation is doing, obviously, there's no way that multi-factor authentication can take place. There's going to be no way for unattended automation to be able to respond to a challenge where maybe a one-time passcode is needed, or an answer, a scan of a QR code is needed, or an SMS or email needs to be responded to, right? That's not going to happen in unattended automation. So instead, we have in identity what's called a service user. And a service user is not allowed to interactively log into the identity UI, but they are able to utilize the identity API and furthermore have no authentication profile applied to them. So there is no multi-factor authentication that these these service users will need to handle. We're going to start with how to deal with a normal user first, and then it'll make looking at how to deal with the service user a lot simpler after we're done with that. In order to authenticate with a normal user that has an MFA challenge that needs to be responded to, we first need to start authentication in identity. When we start authentication in identity, what we're doing is we're sending an initial API post method request with a body that contains information for identity to utilize in order to create a session for us to authenticate through. Remember, this is a multi-step authentication process. Therefore, we need to ensure that we have the same session being utilized throughout all authentication steps. And in order to do that, we need to create the session first, okay? So I've got a tenant ID here. In my case, what I am referring to a tenant ID as in this collection is the beginning 3 letters, 4 numbers of your CyberArk Identity tenant. Whether that is a user tenant, an admin tenant, doesn't matter. They're all going to be formatted in this way, where it is 3 letters, 4 numbers, random. Okay? The one I'm using, AAP 4212 today. We're going to be starting authentication there. And then I have provided my identity username. And just to be sure, let's double check that username real quick. All right, so it is joe.garcia@pineappledev.app. That is correct. That is the one we want to use for a normal user. I do have multi-factor authentication set up on that user, so we'll be handling that here today. Finally, version 1.0 needs to be provided. It's static. It never changes. Just hard code it and forget it. But these other 2 pieces may change based on, what you're pointing to and who you're trying to authenticate as. Once we send this, we'll get back a lot of information in a JSON response. So let's go ahead and send that and check out our request. So our request here was successful, as we can see with the first key value in this JSON response. And I see I was given a session ID that I can use going forward. Now, there's nothing that I need to do with this session ID because all of the session ID and mechanism IDs are handled through the test section here, just like it was in the past. So this is automatically added to the environment variable in the environment template for session ID. And then this mechanism ID is added as well. We will need this. What this section is all of the challenges that we'll need to go through, grouped by whether they need to be responded to first or second, right? Initial, multi-factor, or 2FA, right? The second factor. So up here in my first mechanism section, I see that I have to enter a password. So the first challenge that I need to respond to is just a password authentication. And so by default, my tests here in Postman will automatically save this mechanism ID for us to use later. We won't need to do anything with it. As far as the second factor of authentication, I've got a couple choices here I can choose from. I can use the mobile authenticator to push an approve or deny request. I can utilize a one-time passcode. So in that same app, if I wanted to manually log into it and get the one-time passcode and enter it manually, I could use this mechanism ID. I can send an email to my email address and then answer it that way, whether it is through clicking a link or responding with the one-time passcode. And the same for SMS. I can have it texted to myself as well. Now, in the test section here, we only grab 2 mechanism IDs. The first one is always going to be your first challenge that appears. It will more than likely always be password. The second is going to be the first one that appears in this list here under mechanism. So the mobile authenticator mechanism ID is automatically set through this test. We're going to change it to come from SMS. So I'm going to copy that mechanism ID there. And then I'm going to go into my environment template and scroll down to where I find identity mechanism ID 2 right here, which it says automatically populated. And we're going to change that to be the mechanism ID that I want to use in order to respond to. All right. So that's been updated. That's how you'll do that if it's something that is different from the first one in the set. So that's great. We've got our session ID. We've got our mechanism IDs. This is the only time we'll get this information. So if you're building a web app or something that someone's going to be interacting with, you have all of the necessary information for the next step, okay? You've got, that on the next page that they go to after they enter into the web page their username, they're going to need a password field to put in their password, and then they're going to need a drop-down box that includes all of these different second factor challenge mechanisms so that they can choose which one they want to utilize in the next step. What we're going to do, though, is we're going to move on to a different endpoint to handle all of this. Start authentication, the response we got, that's it. Don't need to handle anything in it because it's automatically taken care of, except for I didn't want the mobile authenticator request, so I came down here and grabbed text. All right. Next step, after starting authentication and getting our session information, is in the advanced authentication folder here. Since we've started our session, now we need to advance that authentication through the section or through the session. The first one that we have in our list that we need to handle is a password, and we have an endpoint for password authentication ready to go here. So I'll open up this tab, take a look at the body, and we'll see I'm providing the identity session ID from the first start authentication request, the mechanism ID for the first one, right, which is the password authentication. My action is to answer because I am providing an answer in the body of this request. That answer is my password. So I'll go ahead and send this across, and we should get back success as true, as we see here. But I didn't get a session token yet. There's still more challenges that we need to do, right? There was that second set, that second factor of authentication we need to handle. So that's what we're going to do now. we were told start next challenge, and that's what we're going to do. Remaining within the advanced authentication section, there is a folder called out of band authentication. This is how you would handle any of those second factor authentications, whether it's email, SMS, mobile authenticator, whatever the case may be. You need to send a post method request letting the session know which mechanism ID are we going to choose for our challenge and response for the second factor of authentication. Well, we know that I updated this value with the mechanism ID for SMS-based challenge response. So that is set there. Our action is going to be start out of band. It is considered out of band because it is not something we're going to be interacting with through the API. We're going to need to leave the API and deal with an email, an SMS, a mobile app, whatever method we end up choosing for how we're going to second factor authenticate. In our case, SMS, we click send, and then I wait for, did I take too long? Maybe. Let's give it another shot. So maybe I took too long because I've been explaining too much, but I'm just going to boom, boom, boom right through here. We'll start authentication again. All right, we'll take that text message mechanism ID here. Update my mechanism ID, the second one under identity mechanism ID 2. Paste that, enter. Okay. Now we'll authenticate with our password. Get back our start next challenge. We'll start the OOB authentication with SMS. Click send. All right, now we've got OOB pending. That means that it's going to send whatever challenge we chose, and it's going to need us then to answer it one way or another. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. So when I get my text message here, I have a one-time passcode and I have a link. The link I can click and then click an approve button in a web page, and it will act the same as manually entering in that one-time passcode. So you'll notice outside of start in this folder on the left sidebar, I have either answer or pull. Answer is going to be how I manually enter in that one-time passcode that was sent to me here. But I want to click the link. So we're going to just simply pull for that challenge's response. So action pull, and that's how we can support me clicking this link. So right now, what you're not seeing is I'm clicking a link, a web page is loading, it's got a green approve button. Okay. Oh, wait, you did see it a little bit. So that has been done, but nothing has changed here, right? I need to continuously be polling on an interval, waiting for that click to happen. But by clicking send here, it will pick up that I approved it, and it will say, all right, here's your token. Every endpoint in authentication is looking for this token, because this token, once it's assigned, if you need to refresh it, sometimes you only need to just start authentication again, and it will just default to providing that token. So that token is already handled for the session, and that has now become a session token that will be used for every other endpoint as the bearer token in the authorization header. So if we were to close all of this out now, okay, and then come to Privilege Cloud and say I want to list all of my accounts, we'll get accounts. All right, and I'm just going to send this across. I haven't changed anything. My authorization is tied to Privilege Cloud folder right now. I've changed all of the different authorizations to use bearer token against its parent folder, in this case, Privilege Cloud. And if we click on this, we'll see bearer token is set as the type, and then that identity token that was just set is the token that's being utilized. That's it. This is already set on all the folders. So you'll already be able to utilize, the get accounts, endpoint, send, and then boom, I've got back all of my accounts that I can see as my user that I'm authenticated as. And so now you can start to use the API regardless of the service. all across the board. So like, let's say we want to go to Secrets Hub and we want to get some tenant information. Well, we can do that now, right? It's using the same identity session token for all of these services. I could go then down to SCA and say, hey, let's get policies in SCA that's attached here. And I don't really want to filter anything. I just want to see all the policies, and we'll send that across. So now within the span of approximately 30 seconds, I have gotten accounts from Privilege Cloud. I have gotten policies information from Secrets Hub, and now policy information from Secure Cloud Access. 3 products using the same identity authentication across the board. So now I can start to do things where instead of needing to do all of my work in Privilege Cloud and then authenticate with Conjur Cloud and do my work in Conjur Cloud, etc., all the way down, you can start to do things logically as it makes sense. All right, I need to do something in Privilege Cloud. Let's update SCA. Now back to Privilege Cloud. Now let's come to Secrets Hub and make sure that the secret gets pushed, and back to Privilege Cloud. You can start to do that because it's the same authenticated session for all of that, as long as your user has the proper roles and identity to be able to access and query those particular services, like mine does. So, very cool stuff here. Now, let's say I needed to do something in Conjur Cloud. I've authenticated as a user, but that's not going to get me all the way through. If I were to come to Conjur Cloud and say, you know, I want to list resources, and I try to send this off the way it is, and we'll just say hosts, fine. We'll send this off and it'll say invalid token. Well, why? Let's take a look. On the authorization tab, we'll take a look at Conjur Cloud, and we'll see it's set up differently. It's not a bearer token. It is an API key. The authorization header is set with this token information and a Conjur session token. So we need to get that Conjur session token. This is the only service that requires this. So what we're going to do is drop down authentication. We're going to say authenticate as a user. And what this is going to do is it's going to utilize Conjur's OIDC authenticator in order to take that identity session token that we've been using for the bearer token for all the other services, and it's going to turn it in exchange for a Conjur specific one. That's it. So we're just going to click send here, and we'll get back our session token specifically for Conjur. But of course, the tests here automatically set this to the variable. And if I come to list resources now, we should no longer get invalid. We should get all of our different hosts that are configured in this particular tenant here with Conjur. And so that's how you handle and deal with users that require MFA in identity, in the identity security platform, our SaaS-based platform, and then get to maneuver through these different services here. So that's a normal user, but what about a service user, that non-interactive user that can only access the API, no user interfaces, that we'll use for unattended automation? So let's talk about that one. I have a service user here, and that service user I'm going to set up really quick for us. Let me just make sure that I clean this up a bit. So we're always going to start authentication, right? So this is always going to be where we start. All right, so as you can see here, I've set up a different username now. It's no longer joe.garcia at pineappleapp.dev. It is now service_infamousDevOps at cyberark.cloud.3558, an amazing email address, as always. And then I set the password here. This is a service user. So if I tried to log in to the user interface with this, it would not allow me in. However, we are about to authenticate with it. And remember what I said earlier. Service users do not have multi-factor authentication applied to them. And there's 2 ways that we can authenticate with them. If you've already got a process supported for attended automation for human users that's utilizing the start authentication method, you can continue to use that start authentication method in your web application for service users as well. It's fine. And the way that you would do that is the same way that you would start the session. For a normal human user, we go ahead and click send. We get back all of our information, but you'll notice, there is this QR code authentication as as a single challenge, right? That could be utilized, and that's just based on the authentication profile that's applied to this particular service user, but all we're really going to need is password here for the API access. And so my next step would be to expand out advanced authentication, select password authentication. It will send the password over, and then we'll immediately get back our token here that says we are now authenticated. And so then I can go to Privilege Cloud, go to accounts, get accounts, and I can send this across and get all of the accounts that that particular user now has access to see. Okay, that's if you have a human user authentication workflow with identity already set up that you want service users to just fall into. It works. There's an easier way though for unattended automation, and that's by using this OIDC authentication post method request, where it goes and it asks our OAuth2 endpoint for a platform token. And so what we're going to be sending across here is client credentials in the form of a client ID and secret, right? Just like OAuth2 dictates, but we're going to be sending the identity username and then the identity password as that ID and secret. And so once I send this across, I should immediately get a token back. There will be no need for me to advance authentication, start a session, or anything like that. This is us creating the session and authenticating and getting our session token back as well. So you'll see access token here is received, and then we can go forth and get accounts again, just like we did before, and be able to return all those accounts. So a lot easier in unattended automation scenarios to do this method, but if you have a hybrid scenario where you expect users with MFA to be required as well to go through the authentication workflow, just stick with your start authentication, advanced authentication, and figure it out from there through the web app, since you're going to be dealing with that anyways. So just to recap, we learned how to utilize a normal user with multi-factor authentication enabled to authenticate to the API and handle all of the different authentication methods that are required for that workflow. We also learned about a service user and how to utilize them in order to authenticate with the API, understanding that they are not able to interactively log into the user interface because it is assumed these are used in unattended automation. And we learned how to update the Postman collection when changes happen to the original source on the public internet. So you can go forth and get dangerous, and until next time, stay secure.